Good morning on this Sunday, December 5th, and welcome to the Georgia Gang. We are all back in studio for the first time in more than 18 months, and we've got a lot to talk about this week. Atlanta's new mayor-elect, Andre Dickens, says he's excited and ready for the challenges ahead, and there are a lot of them. Also, a huge and expected announcement from Stacey Abrams. She's in. She's running for governor again. Also, could we soon see a new city of Dekalb in the southern part of the county? Well, Theron, Martha, and Brian are here. Brian, you're filling in for Phil, who's feeling a little bit under the weather. And we'd like to really welcome Melita Easters, who is making her debut here on the Georgia Gang. Melita is the founder and executive director of the Georgia Win List, which aims to get Democratic women elected across the state. So let's start, everybody. The debate and discussion begin right now.
From the Fox 5 studios, the Georgia Gang starts now.
The results of Atlanta's mayoral race were a surprise to many since City Council President Felicia Moore polled more than 40% of the vote in the general election. But it was Andre Dickens who mobilized his supporters and came out with a huge victory. Atlanta's new mayor-elect could not hold back his excitement about the job ahead. Andre Dickens touted his credentials as an engineer and a natural problem solver. No doubt the main issue he'll work on, violent crime.
But we're going to get officers out of their cars to walking the beat, to going out to the grocery stores, the gas stations, and the shopping centers so they have a presence.
Felicia Moore worked tirelessly on the campaign trail, came up short during the runoff, and conceded with grace.
So there's no division tonight.
All right.
That's right. No division tonight between the Dickens camp and the Moore camp, because we're all Camp Atlanta.
So the final results were Andre Dickens 64% to Felicia Moore's 36%. And Melita, welcome. I'd like to start with you today. What do you think happened? Why did Felicia Moore's campaign implode, for lack of a better term, and Andre really was able to pull this out?
I think the opportunity to have voters truly look at him once Kasim Reed was out of the picture gave him the opportunity to show his charisma and give his vision for the city. And Felicia, for all of her years of being against things, had not clearly enunciated her visionary plans for Atlanta.
Brian, Buckhead just really didn't show up. After all the complaining about crime and all of the issues, where was Buckhead?
Absolutely shocking that it was as bad as it was, because in times of distress, that is a time when voters mobilize. People are angry, they're much more likely to vote than if they're happy. And so I was very surprised in the first round and in the second round at the poor turnout, because the stakes have never been higher. It's not just crime, it's also the city of Buckhead, fracturing the city. One thing I'm glad to see here with Andre Dickens, first step out of the gate as mayor-elect, calling Republican legislators to try to keep the city together. That is what he needs. The next thing I would like to see him do is go out there and speak directly to the police and say, I will have your back. You will get due process if you are caught in a bad situation while doing your job. We need that culture change. Please, Andre, do that.
Theron, let's talk about this, because some of the challenges ahead. I mean, on Tuesday night, you called this pretty much a mandate. Is that fair to say, considering turnout was so low? But also, what does Andre need to do? What does the mayor-elect need to do? I keep calling him an Andre because he is like, who says nice guys don't finish last, right? Yeah. But Andre Dickens, the mayor-elect, will give him his full title. But what does he have to do now? I mean, there are a lot of challenges ahead.
Well, I do think it was a mandate, Lori, because, I mean, it was 64-36. And at a time where a lot of us thought that this mayoral race, particularly the runoff, was going to have a low turnout, and it was going to be close because the last two mayoral elections were less than 1,000 votes. But, you know, I want to give a big shout out to Southwest Atlanta. We talk a lot about Buckhead, and I live in Buckhead, but it was Southwest Atlanta, council districts 10 and 11, represented by City Councilwoman Andrea Boone, who was reelected, and also City Councilwoman Marcia Overstreet, who was reelected. It was the African-American vote in Southwest Atlanta that didn't stay at home like the citizens of Buckhead. They came out, they exceeded expectations, and so I definitely think that that was a big turning point in this runoff election. And also, Lori, you heard me say this, it was the 3 M's. It was definitely Andre had the money. He raised a lot of money during the runoff. He definitely had the momentum. and more importantly, he was able to mobilize his coalition of voters. And so I think that, we got to give a lot of credit to his ability to really close strongly, because at a time, as Melita kind of hinted, we weren't sure how he was going to perform against a woman who got 40% of the vote the first time around. And as far as the challenges ahead, yeah, it's definitely public safety. And I think what Brian just suggested is a good suggestion. I think the mayor-elect will do that. But he also has got to stick with his commitment to ending generational poverty in the city. Affordable housing is going to be at the top of the list. And also, I think job creations. And at a time where people are worried about food and gas, he's got to make sure that he keeps a eye on this COVID-19, this deadly pandemic that we're still experiencing.
Well, you all are mentioning Buckhead, and I think we all saw the statement that the Buckhead cityhood movement put out after Andre Dickens' win. Martha, what does this do to their argument that this is going to be more of the same, and we still are forging ahead?
Well, I think they're still forging ahead, but they didn't actually get involved and go out and vote. So they've got some repairing to do as far as their image is concerned, as far as this movement. I think it's a legitimate movement. I think it's something that ought to be heard. But Andre Dickens, I think that he dealt with the concerns that people had about how he was going to deal with the police, and he talked about community policing right off the bat, which I think is a nice middle ground for him between where he was and what you're saying, Brian. So I think that was a positive thing. And then for me, in watching it, and I used to live in Atlanta, but in watching it, for me, finding out more about him, he was a chemical engineer. He handled himself really well. It gave people an opportunity to do what runoff should do, which is take a second look at candidates.
And I want to talk about, there's a lot of change coming to the Atlanta City Council. Theron, we discussed this on Tuesday, but you had political newcomer Doug Shipman. He becomes the new City Council president. Cleta Winslow was defeated, as was Joyce Shepard. Do you think we're going to see more progressive policies now coming into this?
Well, congratulations to Doug Shipman, and I think if Bobby Capo was here right now, he would definitely say that was his client, yes, and he worked with them. I think I got an email from Bobby celebrating Doug's win. But no, Doug Shipman and Melita and I talked about this before we taped. I mean, he had a lot of experience in the corporate arena, but also with the Center for Civil and Human Rights, sort of leading that center that was so near and dear to a lot of civil rights legends, hearts like Congressman John Lewis, I think helped him. But also, I think he really campaigned. He had a grassroots campaign. He campaigned throughout the city. But also, we lost two great women on the city council. Cleta Winslow, who served the District 4 for a very long time, and also Joyce Shepard. But I think last time I counted, Lori, we're going to have 8 new council members and a new city council president. And so it's going to be very interesting to see how quickly can the city council president-elect Shipman get the council together and make sure that they're willing to work with the new mayor-elect Dickens.
Melita, do they need to be careful to put in too many progressive policies, because will that fire up Buckhead?
I think they need to take a very measured approach about policy, but I also think that it will be interesting to see the fresh approaches that each of these council members bring. And I think it also, Alex Wan's return to the council will make him an impressive leader for the council based on his experience with all these new people.
Well, and there's the balance that cities are having to find all across this country, because the cities in general are more progressive, but the policies have to mesh with the security issues and the things that people care about. And so that's what we're going to see happen in Atlanta. And it's going to be fun to watch.
Brian, what do you think? Because, some of these candidates were not for the police training facility, and they ended up winning. So how do they balance this?
Well, this is going to be a real test, and you're absolutely got to the heart of it, Lori. What's going to happen with Buckhead? If you go too nuts, you are going to give fuel to that fire, and you're going to give Republicans in the General Assembly something to post up against. Like, you don't want this. It gives them a character foil, which would further give fuel to this effort, which has got to get a bill passed in the General Assembly first. So I think they should take a bit of a low profile on that stuff, focus on public safety first, and focus on mending fences in Buckhead and doing the other things, the other issues that the Buckhead people have raised. Poor city services, high taxes. These are things that need to be worked out, and a super progressive policy is going to be very expensive. That's what people in Buckhead are going to hear.
Theron, you're smirking.
I think the one thing that's going to be interesting is that, and Melita talked about Alex Wan, we also got to talk about Mary Norwood is coming back, right? Because J.P. Maxakite, who was a great council member, didn't run. This is what I want to see, Brian. Let the two city council members now, Howard Shook, who got reelected with no opposition, and Mary Norwood, they need to carry the Buckhead water. I think these new council members, particularly in Districts 1 with Jason Winston, Liliana being elected in District 5, Natalie Archibald was unsuccessful for city council president, the gentleman, Councilman-elect Lewis over in District 12, they're going to go in there and they're going to talk about their districts. I think a lot of these council members, they care about Buckhead, and it's important. I live there, but I think you're going to see these new members, Byron Amos in District 3, Vine City in English Avenue, you're going to see them talking about their districts. They're going to have to deliver on the promises that they made during the campaign.
All right, we'll wrap it there. We'll wrap it there, Melita. We'll get to you next block, don't worry. Coming up, she's all in. Stacey Abrams announces her campaign for governor. We'll discuss after the break.
Have a question or comment for the Georgia Gang? Email them at georgiagang@foxtv.com.
My mission is to tie us all together and to build a better Georgia together. One Georgia means that we serve everyone, whether they agree with us, whether they look like us, whether they come from the places we come from, because we should all be headed in the same direction, and that is success.
That's fully what we expected the whole time, so why I've been working so hard on our fundraising, having a record first quarter. We're going to have a record second quarter, and we're just going to keep going. I've been in the fight and looking forward to it.
Well, there's your potential rematch. It's official. Stacey Abrams launched her campaign for Georgia governor, setting up that potential rematch between her and Governor Brian Kemp. Brian, I need to start with you. I don't think any of us on this table and this panel were surprised that Stacey Abrams announced for governor. What do you think about her messaging about this one Georgia?
You know, she has got to go out there and keep some of those suburban voters that voted for Biden and voted for her in 2018, because Democrats are losing numbers with those demographics right now. And she's going to have to do some outreach. She can't just do a base turnout and win this election. The environment for Democrats nationally is terrible. She is not going to be an exception to that. And I think that she is taking a huge risk, actually, Lori, by getting in when she is. Is she a dynamic, incredible candidate, a once-in-a-generation candidate? Yeah, she is. Her ability to raise money, her national profile, it's unparalleled. No, give her her due. But she wants to be president, and she can't be president if she loses for governor twice. This is a huge risk for her.
Melita, let me ask you, what's her strategy, especially on the ground?
I believe her strategy is to bring in all of those newly registered voters who, the more than 1 million who've been added to the voting rolls since the first matchup with Brian Kemp, which she lost by fewer than 60,000 votes. And I believe she has a message that will resonate. Expanding Medicaid will resonate with many Georgians in light of the pandemic long haul people who are not covered currently, and the rural hospitals which have closed since COVID began. So she's going to have a powerful message. She has a powerful grassroots organization that propelled Ossoff and Warnock into U.S. Senate seats. And as a Washington Post columnist said yesterday, Georgia is now the political center of the universe.
Well, Martha, I know I always ask you this, but on the Republican side, what are you hearing about former Senator David Perdue getting in the race in that Republican primary?
Well, he's continuing to make calls around the state, specifically to Casey Cagle bundlers. I've heard from a number of those that have said they've received calls from him. I think that he has made his mind up as far as wanting to be in this race. I have not spoken to him directly about it in a couple of weeks, but but it will be an interesting thing because both he and Stacey Abrams are going to have to make the same case that even though Brian Kemp's numbers are very good, they will do it better. And how will they do it better? So it's an interesting place for him to be, but I fully expect it to happen.
Well, Theron, it was interesting to hear Stacey Abrams say, you know what, I'm just going to let the Republicans battle it out and I'll just be here. I mean, the Democrats are unified.
Well, it's really the timing of her announcement, which I'm actually happy, and I know Melita's happy, that, I kind of put this artificial sort of deadline out there December 1st,
yes,
right?
That's right.
But the reason I was doing that is because I felt like many Democrats, like, okay, let's get past this mayor's race on November 30th, and then it's either she's in or she's not. And now that she's in, that gives us an opportunity to now focus on her. That may be somebody that may challenge her, not sure. I think it's still early. You could see someone maybe do that, maybe not. But now we can start focusing on these other seats. But I think the other thing is with her coming back, it definitely energized the Democratic base. But I agree with Melita. I think that women, our base, are going to be energized, but we've got to figure out how do we get those disaffected Republicans. Brian hears me talk about them all the time, particularly college educated suburban women. And also, she is going to be a direct beneficiary of the new energy and the new registered voters that we have, not just in the metro part of Atlanta, but out in some of these rural areas as well.
Well, and you heard her talk in her opening video about school choice, which is very much a Republican issue and resonates with those Republican women. She talked about entrepreneurship and things like that. So she was using those kind of Republican buzzwords in her opening video, in addition to really answering that question of she has been around Georgia, because that's been the big complaint about her, is that where has she been for the last 2 years? She's been traveling the country, raising a lot of money, but people haven't seen her around Georgia much. So she addressed all of that in her initial video.
Melita, you had your hand up, and then Brian.
I also think that David Perdue and the Perdue political dynasty, which started in the Perry area, has to be concerned that Warner Robins this week in a runoff elected their first ever black woman mayor. So some of the Perdue dynasty may be disintegrating in their own backyard.
Brian?
I wanted to follow up on what Martha said about school choice. I really want to know what she means by that, because I don't know that she means by that what I mean by that. But it is a smart topic, because you want to know why Ron DeSantis won in Florida in a tight race 4 years ago, because so many black voters love school choice and they voted for the Republican on that one issue alone. It is a powerful divider, but Democrats have been united against it. Her strongest issue, to Melita's point, is Medicaid expansion. It's one of those where the Republican viewpoint is the minority viewpoint in the state and hers is the majority viewpoint. But I don't know that she's got a lot of those policy points where she's got the majority that's clear, like she does on that one.
And she got help from the Biden administration in pulling back the waiver that the governor received on his plan to get more health care coverage to those people that weren't in expanded Medicaid. That was all ready to go this past July, and the Biden administration pulled back the waiver as one of the first things that they did after they got elected. So the answer to that was almost there, and then it got pulled back.
Theron, I'm interested in the topic of the school choice. I mean, I covered it down at the Capitol for so many years. There were a lot of Democrats on board with it.
Well, Melita, we got to be careful with these two Republicans now. It's interesting because Brian picked up on it, and Martha always picks up on this stuff. Is that, yeah, that stood out to me as well, because look, I've always said on this show, African Americans are not as liberal as people think we are.
Now, the most conservative part of the Democratic coalition.
Well, we're more moderate, but particularly around social issues, right?
And family issues.
And family issues.
Yeah.
But it's very interesting to me. It's got to be something in the polling. It's got to be something that maybe she's ready to have a sort of robust conversation about. But let me just make this clear. There's nobody out here more committed to the Democratic Party and the Democratic principles than Stacey Abrams, right? And even if she tries to move to the right and middle, the Republicans are not going to let her do it, right? Because they're going to come right out and try to do it. But it will be interesting to see what she follows up with on that, because there are some African Americans in the state of Georgia that do support choice, but the majority of us definitely support teachers. We want to make sure that the public school system is not, being torn apart by these choice and these private options. So
we'll leave it there, because I wish we had a 90-minute show today. We have a lot to talk about. Coming up, some residents of South DeKalb want in on the cityhood movement. We'll discuss right after the break.
Join the discussion on the Georgia Gang Facebook page and watch past episodes on the Georgia Gang YouTube channel.
Good to be back. Wish you all could hear what we're talking about during those commercials. But a newly proposed city of Buckhead would have more than 200,000, DeKalb. A newly proposed city of DeKalb would have more than 200,000 residents if given final approval. Supporters say it's time for this large portion of unincorporated DeKalb to get a say on their future. Theron, what are your thoughts on this?
You know what's really interesting about this, Lori? This is a new name for an old group. This is a group of people who have been talking about wanting to sort of create their own city in an unincorporated part of DeKalb County. I think the only thing I would encourage this group to do is to just really listen to what we've said on this show and look at how DeKalb County is in a much better position than it was just a few years ago. I mean, it's a well-run county. And so I think that, look, they got a legislative right and a First Amendment right to vocalize what they want to do. But I do think that at a time where the county is serving these people in that unincorporated area, I just don't know if it's going to have the support and momentum to ultimately happen.
Brian, do we need more cities in DeKalb County?
Well, let me second. Michael Thurman's awesome. He's my CEO. I live there, and it is so much better.
You live in a city, though. You Brookhaven.
I do. But Michael has made it all much better. So this movement started many years ago, probably in the last 20 years, and the Democrats said this is about white people trying to get away from black county-led governments, right? Well, what's happened since then is that people like their new cities. And guess what? You now have overwhelmingly black areas that are creating cities because they want that same local responsive government that that they can connect to. And it is working. We now have the body of evidence. This has not been the bureaucratic nightmare with extra layers of government that people predicted. It's worked. People like it. And so I think you're going to get to a point where we're not going to have any unincorporated areas in Metro Atlanta anymore, because as people live denser, you need zoning, you need that sort of close to the people government.
All right, we're going to move on because we do have one more topic to discuss, at least one more. The AJC is reporting that the mayor of one of DeKalb's newest cities will have an opportunity to plead guilty in a federal fraud case. At first, Mayor Jason Larry entered a not guilty plea after the feds accused him of a kickback scheme of stealing more than $650,000 in pandemic money. A new hearing now is set for January 5th. Melita, your thoughts on this?
I think it'll be good for him to plead guilty and go on to jail.
Martha?
I have to agree with Melita on that one. I think that when you get to that point with something, you just got to cut your losses and move on.
Well, you know, and a fall from grace, I also want to mention that Georgia's former insurance commissioner reported for his federal prison sentence. Jim Beck was sentenced to more than 7 years for stealing from a former employer. Theron.
Yeah, we've talked about Jim Beck on this show for a long time. I mean, it was very unfortunate that this happened. You know, we all kind of talked about how, you know, he ran as a person who was going to be this watchdog and protect the consumers' money and insurance, and then basically he did the exact opposite. So I'm sure he's wanting to go ahead and start serving his time, and you know, wish him well when he gets out.
But the good that came out of that is John King, who is, I believe, hands down, is the future of the Republican Party in Georgia. I mean, he is dynamic. You can't be around him and not be inspired. And he's already talking about and has already done a bunch of things to change how the insurance commissioner's job is done and how the department's run. He's somebody you got to watch.
And he's ethical.
A nice guy.
Yeah.
And ethical.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. All right, we'll leave it there, everybody, because we got winners and losers coming up. Stay tuned.
Time now for the week's winners and losers.
I want to start, and I'll go quickly. Reese McCraney. He was recently appointed by the Biden administration to the role of senior advisor at U.S. Customs and Border Protection. Very happy for him, and I wanted to say congratulations. Melita, we'll kick it off with you. You're a winner for joining us today. We really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. My winner of the week stood beside Andre Dickens on election night, former Mayor Shirley Franklin. The harder and longer Kasim Reed trashed her record as mayor, the more she came out for Andre Dickens. And I like to think of her glass on election night of champagne being the bitter tears of a former mediocre mayor. And my loser of the week would be decorum and dignity taking a dive as the Charleston Congresswoman goes head to head with our own Georgia embarrassment in a social media slings and arrows contest that's more befitting high school juniors and seniors.
All right, well, not one to mince words there. Brian?
Well, my winners are going to surprise people because they're not my people. Number one, Georgia Tech, because with Andre Dickens, they finally have an in-state win for the first time in a while. Two, the Georgia Democratic Party, because they were terrified that Stacey would leave a vacuum behind if she didn't give in. They would have had a bloody cage match and a candidate that didn't match her stature in any way. This unifies their party, gives them the nation's best state-level fundraiser that we've ever seen, and puts them on a path where everybody can now fall in line. There's still going to be dissenters, but they're going to be quiet because she has the power to silence them.
And along those lines there, and as I go to you, I think Felicia Moore is a big winner. I mean, I know she lost, but her concession speech, so graceful, and I'm anxious to see where she'll end up and what she'll be doing next.
Definitely want to make her a winner. City Council President Felicia Moore. Also definitely want to make a winner Mayor-elect Andre Dickens, and also City Council President-elect Doug Shipman. But also a big winner this week is Daniel Blackman, a dear friend of mine, Clark Atlanta University graduate, who ran unsuccessfully for the PSC, was announced recently by the Biden administration as the regional administrator for the EPA Region 4. So definitely want to make him a winner. And then shout out to the women of Delta Sigma Theta. Lori, I missed this last week. Dr. Deria Wiley, who's a dear friend and big supporter of the show, they were in town for their 55th National Convention in Atlanta last week. So definitely shout out to all the Deltas.
All right, Martha.
So my winner this week, of course, is Mayor-elect Andre Dickens, and I, like Brian, love the fact he's a chemical engineer from Georgia Tech, even though I'm a Bulldog, so go Dogs. Also, my winner this week, surprisingly enough, is Senator Raphael Warnock. He finally came around and said something nice about the military when he was trying to get the defense bill passed. He said they were the finest we have to offer, which is very different than what he said in the past. So I'm going to make him a winner this week. And then my loser this week is the jobs report. I mean, it came out terribly, and as we're dealing with Omicron, we've got to stop approaching COVID in the same way. Doing the same way every single time is the definition of insanity. We've got to start looking what primary care doctors are doing. We've got to start keeping up with vaccinations as we should, but also we've got to look at treatments that are working out in the field. So that's where I am on that.
And these all sound like campaign issues that we'll be discussing over the next 9 months, 6 months, I don't know.
That's
we
for
can
sure.
never get away from them. So thank you all. Thank you all so much for being here. I just want to give you all a hug. It's so nice to be back in person. Yes.
Good job,
Fist
Melita.
bumps.
Great job.
Thank you all so much for watching. We will see you again next week. Bye-bye.